Hi everyone, my name is Ben Hillier and I'll be your host on this episode. Today we're talking with Paul Muller from QQ Research about the 2025 New South Wales State of Volunteering Report. Paul brings well over a decade of commercial experience in preparing a high quality research on the value of public goods. As a social economist, Paul combines academic rigour with practical insight to deliver research that drives real world impact. This episode will cover Standards 2, 5 and 7 of the National Standards for Volunteer Involvement and give you some practical ideas as to how your organisation can meet these standards. Paul, would you like to introduce yourself and give us an overview of your volunteering work?
Oh, I think you just introduced me quite well, Ben. No, look, I've been doing state of volunteering research now for about 14 years. Done about as many reports across all the states and territories in Australia now at least once. And yeah, it's been exciting to watch the methodology evolve, become more inclusive. Yeah, start to make a difference. The feedback I get from it's not like I get stopped in the street, but certainly at the different conferences and presentations and everything where we share this research and the sort of follow up, the way my LinkedIn gets smashed afterwards, is really positive and encouraging.
Yeah, brilliant. So, as you've mentioned, this research has been going on for a while now. So, can you give me a bit more information on the background to the 2025 report in New South Wales?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've done reports in 2021 and 2023 in New South Wales. 2023 too, we actually went national, pretty much covered every state and territory as well, which was an exciting development. But, you know, things can always be improved and worked on as well. And between the 2023 and 2025 projects in 24, being that year in between, for those of you who are good at maths, we did a heap of supplementary work building on the work of the 2023 report, where we went and did a lot of qualitative research, so interview-based focus group type research all around New South Wales and 7 sort of urban, regional, rural centres in New South Wales. And what we got back from that really gave us an opportunity to redesign and rethink some of those questions, especially some of the qualitative type questions in the research design. So around things like volunteer motivations, we were able to get a much more mature and complete picture of volunteer motivations around how they found their opportunities to volunteer, and particularly around barriers. We were previously asking, I think, 1 question around barriers. That turned into 4. Motivations turned into 2. Recognition and reward became a lot richer as well. The other big change we made as well was looking at how we define volunteering. So previously, we'd always ask general questions about people's volunteering. Do you do any of these things? And if so, you're obviously a volunteer, therefore, progress through the survey this way. What we did now, though, is we tried to take on something that's been a little bit too scary to do in the past, but actually say, okay, let's segregate. We came up with 8 type categories or sectors of volunteering. So around things like sport, cultural volunteering, neighbourhood, community, civic volunteering, emergency volunteering, etc. So that gave us with bigger sample sizes. So we surveyed 2,500 people in New South Wales this time, which was the largest one we've ever done in New South Wales. We're able to get a richer picture of how people are volunteering in different spaces as well. As well as within this survey too, we took the opportunity to look at things like AI, which wasn't part of the conversation back, when we did the survey in 2023. It was an emergent thing. Now it's kind of a dominant thing. So we said, okay, while we've got you, what does AI and volunteering look like for you as volunteer managers? So some rich enhancements that still enabled us to compare with the previous iterations of the research, but with a lot of stakeholder feedback, and there was a working group that came together to help, refine and inform the instrument. We've got some pretty cool data, and other states and territories have actually already started applying this method to their research as well. So we're shortly publishing a similar project for Volunteering South Australia and Northern Territory. So.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to digging into the findings then. What have we seen this time in terms of the number of people that are volunteering and the amount of time they're giving to New South Wales?
So back in when we first did the research in 2021, I think there was 70 odd, just over 70% of New South Wales residents aged 15 and over who reported self-identified as volunteers, either formally with organisations or informally, just generally helping out in the community. Um, that result actually came to us as a bit of a surprise because we were conducting the survey in and around COVID, when lockdowns and all the trauma and drama, at a time when volunteering, especially for organisations, should have been harder. That's what we thought. When we measured it again in 2023, we actually found, for want of a better term, the guts fell out of volunteering. We lost about 10% of people self-identifying as volunteers. And that's more than sampling error. So that's more than the margin of error you might get for asking a different group of people the same question. It was what we call a statistically significant difference. That was, I won't say it was an alarming and, we hit the big red panic bell or anything like that, but it was a noticeable change. One of the things I was very careful to caution at the time, though, was that 2 data points don't make a trend. You need 3 data points lining up the same way to see if a trend is actually occurring. So 2 consecutive results heading in the same direction after your baseline measurement. So there was a lot of anticipation around this 2025 report to see, okay, is this a trend? Are we losing 10% of our volunteers every 3 years? The results this time came in 69.5%, nearly 70% of people reported volunteering in this survey too. So the result kind of bounced back to some extent. And with that large sample size, we've got more confidence again in the data. So nearly 70% of New South Wales people, 4.9 million people volunteered. That was, I guess, reassuring. But the question you got to ask is, what's happening? Why is it going from, one big number to a low number to a median number sort of thing? A couple of things happening there. COVID absolutely did confound things. And we can't say for certain what happened, but in 2023, we were kind of at the peak of our inflation crisis and our cost of living crisis and, all those pressures. Now, they haven't disappeared or gone away, but they've certainly stabilised. They're nowhere near sort of heading off the cliff that those cost of living pressures were previously. And one of the things that we find in this report to sort of suggest that may have been the case is that, and we've found in all our reports, certainly post-COVID, is that the cost of volunteering, the amount of money that people take out of their own pocket to volunteer, is quite significant. And for non-volunteers, especially the people who didn't volunteer in the last 12 months, either formally or informally, they say the biggest barrier to their volunteering is the cost. So it shows that volunteering is not only, like, to a degree volatile, the rate of participation, but that volatility is in some way dependent on people's perceptions of wealth or available income or disposable income or cost, essentially. And I think the emergent research that we're sort of revealing over the last few years really tells us that cost of volunteering is a much bigger impact on the volume of volunteering in society than we ever really thought about before. Now, one little aside before I go on, before I let you go on, actually, this is something that is the sector as a whole hasn't caught up with this thinking yet. So if you ask volunteer managers, the biggest things they see as barriers to volunteering are paperwork, the administration burden and everything like that, because that's a burden that the volunteer managers wear, and they're very sensitive to people who, do I have to do all this paperwork? Bugger it, I'm just going to go volunteer somewhere else. The volunteers themselves don't actually see this as a burden. Certainly not to the same extent. They're like, oh, look, it's a thing, but it's not the difference between, me volunteering or not. in the same way that volunteer managers are highly sensitive to it. On the flip of that, volunteers are highly sensitive to cost, but volunteer managers aren't in the same way. They don't see cost yet as the same big issues that volunteers are telling us it is. Now, it may be too that, the cost of volunteering is to a large extent out of the control of volunteer managers. And that's not to say that that's a universal truth. Every volunteer manager doesn't appreciate the cost of volunteering on volunteers. No, this is just an average of the volunteer managers who responded to our surveys. But I think it's an interesting finding. Cost, the extent to which volunteers and non-volunteers see cost as an issue, it's their number one priority. For volunteer managers, it's really low. And for volunteer managers, the number one thing is this administrative burden, the compliance burden. And for volunteers, it's like, put up with it, it's a thing. But it's not as big as some of these other factors like cost, transport, etc.
Right. So speaking in terms of that cost, has that stayed static over the course of the research and it's external pressures that are creating this barrier for volunteers, or is the cost itself increasing?
One of the things that was startling, like kind of blew us away in the 2023 research, we measured the cost of volunteering too. And this measurement relies on people self-reporting, their volunteer expenses and stuff. And then to make it sort of universally comparable, we kind of reduced that to, on average, how much does it cost per hour for an individual to volunteer? And that's a big average, obviously, a big number of people we're averaging from. And again, that cost burden isn't universally felt. In fact, age is a moderator of that. Young people typically pay a lot more per hour for their volunteering than older people. The older you get, the less you pay per hour for volunteering. Probably a whole bunch of reasons going into that. But what we saw when we measured it in 2021 compared to 2023 was it just went through the roof. It went from, a handful of dollars per hour to like $14 per hour. And remember, this happened again in our cost of living crisis. I don't think that, the costs of volunteering inflated, 5 times over 2 years. It's more that people became aware and were sensitive now to the costs they are paying. Previously, we had more economic stability and certainty. People were paying for their volunteering, absolutely, but they probably weren't tracking it in their head that much. It's like, it costs a bit, but it doesn't really mean anything to me. Now, though, in 2023, they hit hard and they were like, well, actually, no. Now I think about it, I'm actually spending a fair bit of money on this because I am more conscious of my overall budget. And that's cool. So the 14 odd dollars that we came up with in 2023 probably suggested a more true value of cost rather than a cost inflation. Now, taking 2023 to 2025, what we've seen is that the cost has increased about 5%. So it's, low 15s now from memory. That's actually normal. That's sort of moving in line with the inflationary rise that we've had over those last 2 years. So it's not like the cost has again been accelerating, exploding 5 times its previous value every 2 years. But we've probably got a more realistic measurement baseline now for cost, and it's high. It's $15 an hour to volunteer. You can see how for young people, when they might only be earning $25 an hour for every hour I work, I covered the 2 hours of the cost of volunteering. That's that's a significant burden. So that's what we've seen with cost. And in the full report itself, we break down where those costs are distributed and everything. But it's an interesting story.
What kind of economic returns do we then see? If there's this huge amount of money being invested on the volunteer side, what's coming out the other end?
Well, it's not like we're throwing that cost away for nothing. People are, voluntarily, reaching into their pockets to pay this money because they enjoy the activity. So it's the thing with cost is it's more, it's a necessary price of entry, if you like. Now, not everyone in society can afford those costs, which is why we see people with lower incomes, lower educational attainment, etc., less likely to volunteer. And people who are in less hours of work every week, like the less you work, the less you volunteer, which is really interesting because it's a cost privilege. But there's obviously a benefit that's being returned from this. People are not just putting in, reaching into their own pocket, they're also sacrificing their time. And that time is valuable too. So when we think about the cost of volunteering, it's not just the dollars and cents, it's what we call the opportunity cost of their time as well goes into it. But there must be something good coming out of that. There must be benefit that is greater than the cost. Otherwise, people just wouldn't do it.
Mm.
And that benefit, obviously, there's lots of spaces and places that benefit from that. An interesting benefit is employers, because employers themselves, managers and employees of staff, actually say that the skills and experience that people who volunteer outside of work, those skills and experience they bring back to the workplace, that's a measurable productivity benefit in the workplace. So presumably they reward that benefit as well. As an employer, the more productive people are, the more likely you're to pay them more, to give them promotions, to give them opportunities and stuff like that. So that benefit then does return to the individual as well as being shared by the employer. All that money washing around in the economy too, millions and millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, that creates jobs, creates taxes, that creates, business opportunity and stuff. It creates profit for businesses as well. So that's another benefit that comes. But the really big benefit is to the individual. One of the things we know is volunteering creates all these different forms of capital, creates social capital, the way people work with each other. It creates human capital in the sense that it makes people better. It equips them with knowledge and skills and experience and stuff as well. It creates cultural capital because, it maintains and preserves and enlivens our cultural heritage as well through different activities that people do. Physical capital, volunteering builds infrastructure, volunteering uses infrastructure and stuff. So there's all these different forms of capital that are created by volunteering. Now, individually, they're all incredibly difficult to measure and isolate sort of thing because they overlap so much as well. But the ultimate expression of that capital is people feel good.
Mm.
Their life satisfaction, their well-being is enhanced by volunteering. And we can see it. There's a statistically significant relationship between whether or not a person volunteers and their overall life satisfaction or well-being. And that's measurable. And if it's measurable, it's quantifiable. And we can put that in dollar terms too. So all of these benefits come together. And as you'd expect in a rational economic framework, the benefits are greater than the costs. It costs $37 billion for volunteering to happen. That's the money invested not just by individuals, but organisations and government and everyone else as well. But we get $200 billion in value from that. Essentially, for every dollar that we invest in volunteering as a society, as a community, we get $5.60 in benefits back. And that's like, cool, that's a good number. And what I guess was remarkable from my point of view as an economist in this space is that volunteering changed, the volume of volunteering changed, the makeup and composition and costs and everything of volunteering changed between 2023 and 2025, but that $1 to $5.60 return was constant. It was exactly $5.60 return last time as well when we measured it too. So that's actually quite stable, the social return on investment we're getting from volunteering. And that's a remarkable story. There's debate around a major public infrastructure project going on in a state in Australia at the moment that has like a 50-cent return for every dollar invested, yet the government's ploughing ahead with it. They think it's still a great idea. It's controversial, but it's going to get up. So, if governments are willing to invest in losses like that, surely better investments on the table are for them in investing and supporting volunteering, particularly around in reducing some of those barriers, one of which is cost. It's the one thing that money can solve, through more investment in volunteering.
Pretty clear case for that investment, that return. But aside from those sort of economic frameworks for volunteering, what are some of the other reasons people are involved? What are some of the more, I suppose, social, mental well-being aspects they get out of it and the reasons that they contribute that time and money to their cause?
I mentioned before that we took a deeper dive into motivations, barriers, recognition, reward, etc., in a way that we hadn't done previously. And what we did with the volunteer motivations, we looked at them rather than just sort of a single question of a bunch of motivations, we actually split it into two. And we asked people, what are the sort of extrinsic or external things that motivate? So what are the things that motivate you? What are the pro-social reasons for volunteering that you're doing, perhaps? And these are things, the top response there was to help others or give back to those who'd helped me. Was a very strong motive. One of the things people came back with, and which I love this answer because it especially came out of the focus groups, is people just said, because I can. Because I've got the means and the motivation, and I just do it. Things to use my skills and experience was a big one as well, and to support more or learn about a cause. Those were kind of some of the top extrinsic motivations. But we separated them out this time from what we call the intrinsic motivations, the benefit to yourself. Why do you, what do you get out of it as a volunteer? That's what you get. That's what you give to others. But what do you personally get out of it? For over 50% of people, it was a sense of purpose. And a sense of purpose is so powerful. It's, it's the reason we get out of bed in the morning, especially on, some of the days when we don't want to. Friendships was another one as well. Fun, enjoyment was another top motivation. Social and community connection. By understanding motivations in terms of not just the extrinsic things and the intrinsic factors as well, is actually a really powerful tool for volunteer managers. One of the things I've sort of discovered and I've been saying for a few years now is that motivating, when we try and recruit and attract volunteers to our organisations, we typically focus on two things: the community you're going to serve and the role you're going to perform. So that's good. But we miss the third thing. And the third thing is, what's the benefit that will return to you? And we understate that or don't talk about it, because volunteering culturally is a selfless thing. We do it for others. So, what are we doing for others, and what do I need to do to fulfill that? But focusing on and leveraging the benefit to the individual, if you're not doing that, it's a real missed opportunity. If you're saying, okay, come and volunteer, and organize, I'm not saying all organizations do this badly, but even the organizations that do it could probably do it better. But come along because you're going to make friends. Come along because it's fun. We got cool things to do. Come along because you're going to learn new skills and experience for yourself as well. You're going to be doing some physical activity. You're going to be working in a community garden or whatever, and you're just going to feel better about yourself. When we make that part and an important part of our messaging to recruit and attract volunteers, that's far more attractive. I won't say it's far more attractive on its own, but it does round out the message. And that's what the data tells us here, is these things are driving people just as much, and probably even more so in some instances, than some of those, do it for others type motivations.
And were there any data points or areas of this report that surprised you?
God, I've done this enough times that, I kind
Pretty
of
used to it by now.
pretty used to it. But there are things that I do stop and I go, well, hang on, that's not consistent with what I've seen before, or hang on, I need to triple check that to make sure. And the big one this time round was the sort of overall rate of participation, because we'd had this sort of yo-yo effect, and I was, is that real, sort of thing. But it's certainly explainable. I think what was cool this time in the report, it was around AI and volunteering. Actually, there's two things. I'll talk about AI quickly first. The first thing was the very low uptake of AI usage in volunteering compared to other sectors of the economy. So in the business space, people were probably about 60% of business users were using AI at around the same time that we were doing this research. Only 30% of paid volunteer managers were using it. And I think about half as many, again, only about 15% of unpaid volunteer managers were using AI in their work. We dove into what people were using it for and what they weren't using it for, or why they might not be using it as well. And that's in the report. I encourage people to go and have a look. Trust and confidence in AI is something that people sort of said, those were some of the barriers to them actually using it, but just not knowing how to use it as well. The thing with AI and the whole AI revolution, it's a new skill set. It's an entirely new thing we have to learn. That takes time. We need to carve time out to do that. And we know that our volunteer managers are stressed and under-resourced. And it's like, oh my God, if I have to learn AI again. And there's a lot of sort of, hype busting around AI and stuff as well. It's like, just seems too hard. I know what I'm doing. I'll just keep following my processes. Compared to the rest of the sort of working population, that's a real missed opportunity, because there are the people who did report using AI certainly did report efficiencies around a whole heap of things, from grant writing to stakeholder communications to social media posting to policy development, things like that. And I think AI doesn't necessarily need to replace and AI will never replace volunteer managers. That's just not a thing, because it's a human skill. It's getting around and talking to people and motivating and sharing them and stuff. But it can make life easier for you, and it can certainly lift some of the administrative burden from you. There are a few people who are like this, but they're probably more in the minority than majority, and that's people who are volunteer managers because they really love paperwork. Most people are in that volunteer or volunteer management role because of the service, or because the cause they believe in and the service they're delivering and all those benefits we spoke about before. The paperwork's a pain in the butt. And the administrative parts. And that's probably a really low-hanging fruit opportunity where AI can automate or fast track or make more efficient a lot of that drudgery that comes with being a volunteer manager, which hopefully frees you up to do more of the personal stuff, which makes your life easier. But the second point I wanted to make, and the surprising thing, again, it was a new measurement this time around, was that volunteer managers who are in a paid role, who responded to our survey, typically gave an average of, or a median, I should say, of 23 hours per week in their role. Oh, no, it was average, sorry. I mean score of 23 hours a week. They also gave an average of 4.3 hours per week in unpaid overtime to their role. Now, 4 hours a week unpaid overtime actually doesn't sound, it sounds pretty normal in a commercial setting if you're paid for 40 hours a week. But if you're paid for 23 hours a week and you're giving an additional 4.3 hours a week, that's like almost, or I think so, yeah, it's almost just under 10 bonus weeks of your time to your employer every year. And that's double the national average. So on average, people give about 5 weeks unpaid overtime per year to their employer. Volunteer managers give double that, 10 free weeks a year to their employer. That's a problem. And without singling out individuals or organizations, in general economic terms, we would call this exploiting the workforce and taking advantage, I'd probably suggest, of the goodwill that volunteer managers bring to their job, that quite honestly, in comparison to market rates of pay for equivalent jobs in corporate world, they're getting paid less in the first place. And now we're tapping them for a massive amount of unpaid overtime on top of that. That's something the industry needs to address. That's something they need to, and I don't want to put the burden of this on volunteer managers. It's on the decision makers, at the top level of organization who are setting these pay scales and stuff. And it's very easy to sort of pretend it doesn't exist, from a boardroom type perspective. It's like, hey, it does. We're calling it out. And, everyone knows resources are stretched thin and everything like that. But the fundamental resource, the piece that makes everything work in the volunteering ecosystem is the volunteering manager. Without them, I shudder to think what our rates of participation, what of our rates of engagement, and how efficient volunteering would actually be if we took all the volunteer managers out. They're what we call the but-for resource. But for volunteer managers, volunteering doesn't look anything like it does now. Underpayment has long been recognised as an issue, but when you've got exploitative labour practices, I'm certainly not accusing organisations of intentionally exploiting their workers in this regard, but this casual, almost ignorant exploitation is in some respects just as bad. Yeah, so that's a at the moment, I'm expressing my personal opinions as opposed to the opinions of the Centre for Volunteering or the other organisations and peak bodies I work for. That's certainly how I see it.
Yeah, and as you said, definitely important thing for the sector to look at and consider the approach that's being taken there.
Yeah.
Well, that hits our key questions. Was there anything else around this topic you wanted to comment on?
Oh, look, you've seen how passionate I am about all of this and how much I love working in this space and sort of discovering and uncovering new knowledge. I suppose the main thing I want to put out there is that if people do have questions about the report, even if they're challenging questions, even if they're things like, well, that number seems wrong, or I don't believe that, or I don't know how you got there, have a chat to us. Like, just reach out. Happy to explain the methodology and the deep detail of the process and everything we arrived at. And honestly, too, it's those challenging questions that are put to us out there that actually improve the work and make it better for future iterations as well. So, yeah, hugely grateful to the Centre for Volunteering, the Department of Communities and Justice as well, who've sponsored this work for a number of years in New South Wales as well, and some of the other, the supplementary work that we've done too. They're the ones who make this possible. Massively grateful as well to everyone who participates, especially in the Volunteer Manager Survey, to give us the rich data. And, from a personal level, again, massively grateful to everyone out there who is selflessly giving of themselves, not just as a volunteer, but as a manager in this space. Keep up the good work. And, when you identify issues or challenges in your sector, let us know and we'll do what we can to dig around and find the evidence for them.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Paul, for coming along today, sharing advice and expertise. And hopefully we'll see you again for the next one.
Looking forward to it. Thank you very much, Ben. Have a great one.